Hello and thank you for joining me today at our quarterly briefing on the shopper confidence of UK consumers. I'm Paul Langston and I head up our retail location strategy team here at CACI. Please join in and post your questions. I'll do my best to answer them as we work through this agenda. As ever, let's start with a brief introduction. Apologies for those of you who've joined in previous briefings. And we've now been working with our friends at BPS, that's the British Population Survey, for 6 years now to track shopper confidence on a monthly basis. This analysis is based on the BPS asking a large and demographically stratified sample the same question each month. And that's the one shown on the screen there. Thinking about your financial situation at present, how do you think it is likely to have changed, if at all, in 3 months' time? Now, we look at the net difference between those saying better versus worse, and we track this as a positive or a negative percentage. Now, just briefly, the key difference of our approach to monitoring confidence is that whilst the headline shopper confidence trend is interesting, our Acorn classification enables us to look at the trends below the headline rate. We can then see how different consumer groups are thinking, and we can then link this to their shopping behaviours, brands, and places. So, let's get straight in and look at the headline shopper confidence trend. The headline level of confidence has risen by just under 1% over the quarter to end December here at plus 12%. I would say this is a pretty strong result in what is traditionally the toughest quarter for shopper confidence. I will illustrate this point in more detail in a minute, but first let's quickly just set the context. At last quarter's briefing, I talked about how encouraged I was by the fact that we'd seen some late summer rising confidence after these 4 flat months, or flat or negative months, around the election. I also said that I was not too concerned about the 1 percentage point drop in September, which I'd expected as part of the normal seasonal rise in worries, or fall in confidence, as we head to Christmas. For the same reason, I'm not surprised to see the continuation of this at the start of the quarter, when we saw a further 1 percentage point drop in confidence in October. However, I and retailers should be pleased to see that we saw an almost 2% rise in confidence over November and December to end the year at almost 12%. I intentionally stressed the word almost in that last sentence. As much as I don't like to talk about percentage points in something as unscientific as shopper confidence, I am now going to get really specific for this slide. Now, much as I'd love to say that we are now at the highest level of confidence since our records began in 2010, I'm going to be honest. Once we account for decimal points, we are just a fraction below the high point that was reached before the election wobble in March 2015. And yes, if we wanted to round to the nearest 0.5%, we are really now at plus 11.5. But enough of splitting hairs. We finished the year at a level of shopper confidence that is likely to be the envy of much of the world. And when we remind ourselves where we've come from since 2010, we are really reminded how things have improved over the 6 years in terms of shopper confidence. To help to give some context to that, the dark lines split the chart into years. And looking at the last year, we can see how, it may have been a little bit rocky. And as I've said before, I think this was much due to the uncertainty of the election. But we've had a year where the headline rate of shopper confidence has been above plus 10% for 9 of the 12 months. And the 3 lowest months were not surprisingly the start of the year, so things have built from there, and the 2 straight after the election, where we were holding our breath to see what happened. Now, if we contrast that with what happened in the previous year in 2014, and you see just how much things have improved in terms of shopper confidence in 2015. In 2014, we only briefly topped 10% once, and that was in the height of the summer before we started to panic about Christmas. And finally, for context, let's contrast 2015 to 2010, the left-hand part of the chart, and the previous election year. Here, confidence nosedived after the 2010 election and has taken years to recover. So in short, it's been a pretty good year shopper confidence-wise, but I know that that has not always been felt by every retailer. And as I wrote this, the radio headlines included the dire trading figures for M&S and George Osborne warning of economic turbulence ahead. We will look into all of this in a bit more detail in a minute when we dip into the demographic breakdown of the headline trend. But let's just stick with the headline rate for one last graphic to emphasize why last quarter's headline figures were so positive. In last quarter's briefing, I put up this graphic to stress why I was not concerned about that 1 percentage point drop in September, as I said that it was normal as part of an annual slide in confidence as consumers start to worry about Christmas. Obviously, at the time, I clearly didn't know what was going to happen in 2015. But now we can see that the end of 2015 was pretty remarkable in the context of recent years. The only other year that saw a rise from September to December was in 2012, when the recovery really started to take hold. So, given the positive headline trends, now let's dig into things a bit deeper and use the unique ability of the CACI BPS confidence tracker to go below the headline trend and look at the behaviour of different consumer groups. So, let's look at the behaviour of the different Acorn categories and see which is this quarter's key Acorn group. As ever, this is my busiest chart, but I'll animate it in a minute as we develop the key points. Let's continue in the positive vein. Again, all of the 5 broad Acorn categories spent all of the last 6 months of the year with a confidence level above 5% or more. Now, I've never been able to say that before at this time of year, and actually I can say that for the whole 12 months of 2015 they were above plus 5%. Now, this is quite a result compared to the fact that in 2014 the most wealthy, the Affluent Achievers category, dropped as far as 0, and in 2013 3 of these 5 Acorn categories spent at least 2 months saying they had negative confidence, so that they expected things to get worse in the 3 months ahead. And finally on this slide, for the second quarterly briefing in a row, I can say that this reflects the most positive 6 months across the demographic spectrum since our records began, which is pretty remarkable given that it was Christmas. So, really, outside of grocery, where we know that there are some major shifts going on, I would argue that we should expect to hear a large number of positive trading statements from retailers over the next few weeks. Now, that is a slightly bold statement to make as I write this just as the first trickle of announcements come through and the BRC is starting to say that sales weren't great. I read articles about footfall being down, wet weather impacting sales, and how Black Friday failed to take hold in stores, and about heavy discounting in the lead up to Christmas. But I would argue that, whilst all of these things have happened, we need to get back to what the consumer wants and how the consumer was feeling in the run-up to Christmas to really set the context for the performance of retailers over the Christmas period. Now, I know that retailing is an incredibly complex business, and that getting it right in that key quarter up to Christmas is incredibly hard. But my view is that if, and that is a big if, retailers got it right, they should have had a good Christmas. This chart shows that consumers were confident and were happy to spend like they haven't been for years. The challenge for retailers was to make sure that they met this desire. And I believe that those that will have struggled are those that didn't get it right in some way. For example, at our Retail Dimensions briefing in May last year, we showed this slide and we stated, as it says here, that Black Friday is not as positive an event as it should be or could be, and that shifting the focus to a click and collect event will encourage more positive behaviour. We also got a lot of press coverage around Black Friday when we reiterated that we thought it would be a largely online event this year. Sadly, many of the retailers that look like they may have struggled over the Christmas period are those that got this message too late or were not set up for the omni-channel world that's here to stay. As a result, such retailers missed the early online sales boost from Black Friday, and also had too much of the wrong sort of stock in store and were forced to cut margins by discounting to clear it out over the remainder of the period. Those are likely to present the best performance over the next few weeks will be the ones who made the most of the unprecedented levels of shopper confidence and met their needs across the many channels that consumers now want to shop, and who were not forced to discount. But we may see some retailer performance differences based around the nuances of how the different Acorn groups and categories targeted by each retailer were feeling in the run-up to Christmas. So let's start by looking at the not so positive ones, which you will find at both ends of the demographic spectrum, as I animate this graphic over the next few slides. Firstly, the affluent achievers, the country's most affluent consumers. I always get a bit concerned when I see this bunch start to see a drop in shopper confidence, as they are the leaders of many of our businesses, and if they are starting to worry about their businesses, maybe we should be worrying too. These are the people who are likely to be looking a bit further afield and seeing the shadows lurking from the slowdown in the Chinese economy and unrest in the Middle East. And maybe there is some of that behind this slight drop in confidence over the quarter, where confidence fell from plus 9% in September to just above plus 5% in December. In fact, they've actually dropped by 7 percentage points from their record level of plus 12 in April 2015. Personally, I do not think that the slight drop over the time period shown on this chart is enough to have impacted retail sales over the Christmas period. But I do respect their concerns, and they do marry up with the concerns raised by George Osborne about the background turbulence in the global economy. So we need to keep an eye on this Acorn category, as continued declines may well be followed by something more worrying. At the other end of the wealth spectrum are urban adversity, the other Acorn category to have seen a 3 percentage point drop in confidence since September. As ever, I remain slightly baffled by why confidence in this least affluent Acorn category is currently sitting almost exactly 10 percentage points higher than the most affluent category. And this is particularly strange under a Conservative government continuing to sing the song of austerity. And the general trend of slight decline in confidence on this chart may well be a response to this austerity tune. However, urban adversity are the category most likely to feel the squeeze at Christmas when things are tight, and this may simply be a seasonal trend. Indeed, that slight rise in confidence in December may reflect the realization that there were still some great bargains to be had on the high street close to Christmas this year. Now, what this 6-month view doesn't show is both the 12-month picture or the variations at the more detailed Acorn category level. So let's briefly look at these by looking at the 3 groups that make up this urban adversity Acorn category over a 12-month period. So here we see some great news, and that is that over the course of the year, young hardship, a group that has really suffered since the recession, appear to have seen a considerable rise in confidence, probably driven by improving job prospects. Unfortunately, the other 2 Acorn groups in this category, which are more family groups, appear to be suffering slightly from ongoing austerity and have seen a slight drop over the year in confidence. But again, we need to be not too negative here. We are witnessing a small 2 percentage point drop amongst groups of consumers who are generally still saying that they think things are going to get better with their finances rather than worse. So let's move back to the broader Acorn categories and the 6-month time horizon. Here is the 6-month chart for the financially stretched Acorn category. They are one step up the affluence ladder and have witnessed a very similar, slightly negative trend, similar to the one of urban adversity. But hidden behind these figures are the inevitable decline in confidence of the student life Acorn group that sit within this category. Now, student life always see a decline after the summer holidays in their confidence when the bank of mum and dad closes. Now, I talked about that in the last webinar, and I've seen that trend exactly as I expected. What we also can't see, though, on this chart is the least confidence of the financially stretched Acorn category, poorer pensioners. Now, they drop back down to just +1%, so only just above negative. And I'll touch on this point on pensioners more in a minute. Now, on a more positive note, I made the rising prosperity category my key Acorn category in last quarter's webinar, as I was concerned about their dip in confidence shown by the left 3 bars of this chart. The excellent news is that this big spending bunch of tech-savvy, fashionable young adults really bucked the trend of decline in the run-up to Christmas. Now, hopefully, this should be reflected in the Christmas sales figures for both premium retailers and those with strong online presence. Which brings us to this quarter's key Acorn category, the comfortable communities. Retailers should always be pleased to see this category seeing such a positive change in shopper confidence, particularly at this time of year, as they are the largest chunk of the population, making up over 27% of the UK. So, strong confidence here should really mean solid performance for retailers serving the middle ground. And this growth is one of the reasons that I've chosen them as this quarter's key category. But another reason why I've chosen comfortable communities is there is also some fascinating volatility amongst the 5 component Acorn groups that make up this category. So let's start by highlighting the less positive Acorn groups. The countryside communities, the dark green, and the comfortable seniors, the light green Acorn groups, have both dropped into negative territory at some point in this last quarter. They are the only ones of the 17 groups to have done this since poorer pensioners spent January at -1%. Now, remember when we were discussing the modest means Acorn category just now that I flagged that poorer pensioners had almost dropped into negative territory this quarter. Now, it seems no coincidence that these are the 3 groups with the most mature residents within their Acorn categories. And on further investigation, I've seen that over the 6 years of records, these are the only 3 Acorn groups whose average confidence over the period has been negative. Now, to me, that shows how these mature consumers, many reliant on pensions investments, are continuing to be frustrated by the low interest rate economy. Perhaps the lack of action by the Bank of England to raise rates following the election may have brought this to a head for the 2 groups shown here early in this quarter. Now, I'm not sure what resulted in the marked improvement later in the quarter, but perhaps it was the Chancellor's more upbeat autumn statement around this time. Of the remaining Acorn groups in the category, the successful suburbs stayed flat as a pancake, and really I don't have a lot to say on this one for that reason. Whilst the younger adults of starting out appear to have grown in confidence later in the Christmas shopping period, and maybe again this is when they saw there were some bargains to be had in store. Which brings us to the largest group of steady neighbourhoods, who are also encouragingly the most positive, not just within their Acorn category, but in the population as a whole. Over the quarter, they've seen their confidence rise 5 points from +18% to +23%. But this is also part of a steady rise of 16 percentage points since their slight dip to the election in May. With this group being the very definition of the middle ground of the Acorn demographic spectrum, the UK government and retailers alike should take a great deal of confidence from such a solid rise in confidence in the latter half of the year, particularly when you compare this current level of +23 with their average confidence over the 6-year period, which has been just +1%. So these are not just a naively happy bunch. These people think things are going to get better. So, what does the rise in confidence of this middle income, middle Britain group mean for the UK retailer? Well, As the name suggests, the steady neighbourhoods consumer does not set the world alight when it comes to their spending habits. Our shopper dimensions data show they have fairly average levels of spend per visit and dwell time. However, they go shopping slightly less than the average consumer and spend slightly less online. They're also not big users of the catering offer when they go shopping. So, steady consumers, steady neighbourhoods. But the good news is there are a lot of them. And they are found widely across the country, meaning that broad benefits should be felt in local economies of most of the country. And many of the UK's biggest name retailers should also benefit from the confidence of steady neighbourhoods. And some of the ones that are most closely aligned to this group are shown on the screen here. But the word here is, key word again here is should. They should benefit from the confidence. As I mentioned earlier, just because shoppers are willing to spend, it does not mean they will spend with a well demographically aligned brand if that brand does not meet their needs. And sadly, the profit warning of Bon Marché on this list may very well be an example of this, as their core target market may have decided they can meet their desires elsewhere. So, what does all of this mean for the year ahead? Back to this slide again. Shopper confidence for the year has been an awful lot better than I had feared from the results of the first quarter of 2015. At that point, I was concerned that the election and global uncertainties may tip us into an alarming decline, with some of the Acorn categories hitting negative territory by Christmas last year. I'm pleased to say I called that one wrong, as we saw a year of stability and slight growth in confidence. So, now we enter the year in a strong place, and we should look forward to a year of solid, if not staggering, shopper confidence. And well-placed retailers should benefit from this. Now, older shoppers will continue to wish for a rise in interest rates, but this should not impact retail. But we will need to keep a close eye on the affluent achievers to see if they are seeing something in the global slowdown that really may hit the UK, particularly when we remind ourselves how easy it is to get drawn back into the roller coaster ride that we've seen over the last 6 years. So let's wrap up with a summary of today's findings. Firstly, I think there has been a strong result in terms of shopper confidence in a tough quarter. We've seen shopper confidence buck the trend of the Christmas decline in confidence, which means we should have had a decent Christmas for well-positioned retailers. Middle income groups saw the biggest rise in confidence, and I believed that shoppers are well placed for a good year ahead. But global volatility is on the horizon, and we will need to continue to monitor things as the year progresses. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. If you'd like more information about any of this, please don't hesitate to contact me or use any of those links on the screen. Also, if you are available, we would love to see you at our event on Thursday the 28th of January, where some of my colleagues will be particularly focusing on the opportunities in London that we're witnessing at the moment in the country's most vibrant economy. Thank you again for listening. I hope to see you next quarter.